Hello. I'm just coming back to the same character that I was doing in the last video. So I thought I'd share what I'm doing. I haven't done much to it since the last time I was working on it on the last video. Just added a few reference lines basically, and I changed the pose slightly, just giving the legs a bit more of a bend. It's still not perfect, but I'm not going to worry too much at this stage. I'm also going to start on the head. I've got this Arnie head here that I always use as a reference, and I've made a little ball out of aluminium foil to get it started. It's nice to have a head that's the same scale as the figure you're doing, because it's really useful for posing. And you can get an idea of where the neck should be, where the chin's going to be, and it gives you a good size reference to make a head. But while the clay is soft, I'm not going to do much to the head other than just get a basic head shape. So I just keep comparing the size, trying to get it approximately the right size at least. So, I mean, the way I always go when I'm doing a head is a centre line, and then the eyes normally fall right in the middle of the head, and then below that, if you cut that space in half, is normally where the nose finishes, and then if that space below that, you cut that in half, it's normally where the slit of the mouth is. So that's a quick way, that's a quick way of getting a quick head form down. I'm just going to let that cool a bit before I do anything else to it. And I'm going to start raking the surface of this. I've got a nice rake tool here that I made using a bass guitar string. Just put inside a piece of aluminium tubing with some epoxy resin around the top. But it's really good for monster clay. It means you can get a really nice rough rake, which smooths all the surfaces down to the same level. This just makes it much easier to see where you need more volume or less volume or mass. When everything's the same kind of texture and the same level, it's much easier to see. These tools are super cheap to make. You can buy just a normal pack of bass guitar strings, probably about 15-16 euros for a good set. And then you can just buy some aluminium tubing, which is pretty cheap, and some epoxy resin, which is really cheap if you buy it online. And you can make, you know, a good 20-30 tools if you buy a couple of rods of aluminium. I mean, I've made loads, but they don't last very long. They normally, you know, they break after a couple of weeks, maybe a month or two, if you use them regularly. But you can always just pull the string, the guitar string out, and break off the epoxy, and then just make a new one using the same aluminium. If you want a less of a harsh finish on the rake, you can also use guitar strings. I've got loads of different ones here in different shapes. There's a square one, it's quite a thin string. That'll give you a much finer kind of smoothing effect. This is really good for flat surfaces. If you want to really get a nice edge on something, you can just polish it right down. And then in a while I'm going to be using some mineral spirits here, which smooths things down even further from the fine rake. I'll just show you quickly. So you can get a really smooth finish like that. But I'm not there yet. I'm still working on the overall proportions. Now, as this character is going to be wearing clothes, I don't need to worry too much about the surface of the skin, because it's going to be mostly fabric, if not entirely fabric. So really any anatomy that I put into the figure should be things that are going to show through the clothing. And probably also some larger reference points. But I don't need to worry, for example, I don't need to make the abs super detailed because they're going to be covered in fabric anyway. You just want to give the essence of them being there, with obviously with skin on top and then with the fabric on top of that. Another thing you can do after this rake process is to use one of the little lighters that I was showing you in the last video. If you go over this, it's a really good way of just smoothing out what you've just done. A bit bobbly, but and that's how I smooth out monster clay generally. It's a combination of the rake, the lighter, and the mineral spirits. Thanks for watching, Raven, and Jared, nice to see you. Yeah, Friday night's always a good night for art in general. Sorry if I'm a bit slow on the old comments, guys. I do read them, I promise. I don't know if it's already cold where you are, but today was the first day of the winter as far as I'm concerned. Definitely different from last week. It's still blue skies, but the temperature has definitely dropped. and just debating whether it's long john time or not. That has been the mental battle in my brain today. Is it too early to break out the long johns? So as well as this being a smoothing process, it's also a good way to start shaping some more of the detailed forms, the more of the smaller forms. I mean, I can already see that I need more mass on the arms and on the thighs, but it definitely helps to try and smooth everything down a bit. Obviously the lower arms need a lot more work, but I like to just do this at various stages just to get an idea of where I am proportionally. Now, if it's looking really lopsided, that is not because I'm a bad sculptor, of course. It's because I have to have it at a strange angle because the camera is not directly in front of me. No, I'm joking. It's totally my fault if it looks wonky. I will probably correct it at some point. Or maybe not. Humans are not symmetrical. Not yet, anyway. Although CRISPR is definitely going to change the game. Fortunately for me, I don't have to sculpt the toes because the character has boots on, I think. I'm totally guessing, but I presume some kind of boot or shoe at least, which is great. I hate sculpting feet, toes especially. Never known anybody actually enjoy sculpting toes. If you are one of those people, put your hand up and then kindly leave the video. I'm joking, obviously. So yeah, the legs are all kind of weird, but just going to get a nice smooth surface on the whole thing. Actually, while my clay is really soft, I'm just going to get a little bit more down on the base. Just reading the comments, making me laugh. Yes, it's monster clay. And Raven, I'm slightly jealous. I love the snow. But I'm sure living in it every year, for as long as you have to, up north, beyond the wall, I'm sure it's not as pleasant as the romantic idea of it I have in my mind, but it must have its positives. At least if you leave a sandwich outside, it's probably going to be okay the next day. See, there's one advantage I can see immediately. I've really got to stop leaving sandwiches outside. That's what happens when it's too warm, but luckily it cools down quite quickly. It sticks to itself really well, monster clay as well, so you can easily clean off your hands and your tools. If anybody's got any ideas about what the base can be, I'd be interested in hearing them. I don't mean the materials I'm going to use, I mean conceptually, what's he going to be standing on? Considered concrete, gets a bit obvious. Fucking mosquito. Maybe cracked concrete, might look quite cool, quite interesting to sculpt, but really not sure. I guess it would depend on which scene, which moment in time in the stories I'm actually sculpting it. And I'm not going to know that for sure until I get a little bit further on and I decide on costuming and possibly some parts of his appearance as well. Oh, dude, that sounds amazing. I've always wanted a fire pit. You're not allowed fires in Barcelona unless you have the top roof terrace of a building. Then you're allowed a barbecue, which is basically a fire. I guess you could get away with a fire. And even when you go camping in Europe, generally, everywhere in Europe, you're not allowed to make fires. Even though I know how to do them safely, blah blah blah. Not sure about England. I know you can't on campsites, but you can have bonfires in your back garden, no problem. Although these days, I don't know, I haven't lived in England for a while. Probably have to write to your local council, fill in an application form. Who knows? I'm just giving the base enough room for his feet to be comfortably planted there with a little bit extra so that I can put a good design on the base. I often like to just use pieces of scrap plastic, rocks and stones, pieces of cork, things like that, and just embed them in. Sometimes even brush a thin coat of clay over the top to kind of soften some of the edges. You can also use sand, gravel, anything you would if you were making a miniature base for war games, terrain or anything like that. It's a similar process. Okay, so I'm just going to finish the raking. Got distracted by the base. You can see with this really heavy rake, it doesn't take long to really smooth a surface down flat. And if you go over this, again after this with this rake, you go over it with a finer rake. And then with the mineral spirits, you can get a really almost polished surface. You can even sand monster clay. If you stick it in the freezer for 10 minutes, 20 minutes, get it super hard, you can actually use a fine grain sandpaper and get it really, really smooth. But you're going to probably ruin the sandpaper. Yeah, he's got really skinny upper arms at the moment, so that's one part I need to bulk up a bit for sure. And also his thighs are really a little bit too thin at the back, especially. There's probably hundreds of other things that I'm missing, but I will take a few photos. I sometimes have a problem seeing, even though I can see that there's a problem, sometimes have a trouble seeing what the problem is. And I find there's a few different ways that I've learnt from other people. There's a few different ways you can get around that. One of them, probably the most obvious, is to just walk away and wait a while and come back, see if you see anything different. Another way would be to use a mirror and look at the object or look at the sculpture in the mirror, and you can normally see from a different, obviously from a different perspective, but your eyes notice things that they might not have done before. And then probably the one that I use the most is taking a photo or several photos from different angles and then just looking at them and seeing what's, you can see much easier what the problems are when you're looking at a 2D image, I think, for some reason. So yeah, if you're a little bit stuck and you can see that there's something wrong but you can't work it out, try using a mirror or try taking a photo. Needs a bit of bulk where his pecs should be as well, I think. Give him a little bit of a lower crotch there. I'm going to start adding some bulk now to the back of his legs. I'd always rather add too much and then rake it back. I find that's an easier process. I mean, it's weird talking to different sculptors and watching different sculptors and how they work. Some people like to add more than they subtract. Other people like, obviously, the other way around, to like carving almost, starting with a big block and just working into it until it forms the shape you want. I mean, I've never attempted proper carving in stone or wood. It terrifies me a little bit because once you make that change, there's no going back. That's what I love about clay. That's one of the main reasons I love ZBrush so much. The undo feature is incredible, obviously. It's really weird working in ZBrush and then coming back to traditional. Especially the symmetry thing, because anybody that hasn't done any digital sculpting but might not know, you can just press a button and turn symmetry on. So if you do something on this side, it copies it on this side, which is obviously, I'd say, the main advantage in terms of speed. But do prefer traditional. Who knows if that will change one day. Maybe when they figure out how to use augmented and virtual reality together, where it's more tactile and you can actually feel it. Who knows, maybe then it would be more pleasurable. Raven, yeah, we know what the character's going to be. I just lazily don't have the reference in front of me right this second. Actually, I can just get it. It won't take me 2 seconds. Yeah, so he's got some kind of knee-high superhero boots on. But again, that could well change. We don't know. Right, this second, the final design that we're working on and working with. But I like it. I like the one I've got here. So I'm going to work off it, and I can always modify as I go. I can see there's a lot of comments I haven't answered. I'm sorry about that, but my laptop is over there. I will answer them, I swear. To make his bum a little bit bigger. His buttocks. And he's got some kind of, it looks like wire or something. A splinter, he had a splinter in his ass. All right. Put a little bit more mass on the arms here. All right, it's getting there. I mean, compared to the reference, I mean, it doesn't have to be the same. I need to just refine it down as I go. But now the head's cooled down, I might start blocking in at least the basic shapes of the head. I normally start with like a very basic skull shape. And these little bits of clay that you pull off the rake, they're really good for working on finer detail and smaller parts. So I'm not worried about detail right now, obviously. I just have to get a basic head shape down. And there becomes a point where you can't really continue with your fingers. Unless you've got teeny weeny fingers, in which case I'm kind of jealous. Big old sausages like mine. I'm just going to hollow out a little hole for the eye. In terms of eye forms, I have a box full of different sized ball bearings and beads, and little balls that I've made out of Sculpting or Cosclay now has replaced Sculpting for me. Many years being frustrated with Sculpting. Got Cosclay, tried it. It's incredible stuff. I didn't get any breaks or any little cracks in the surface. and it's flexible. I mean, why would you not use it? So always got to keep looking at your reference. If you have one of these 6 scale heads, very useful. You can literally put it right in front, check the thickness, check the depth. Obviously I'm not sculpting the Terminator, but most people's heads are approximately the same size, so unless you're Kieran Stevens. Just wanted a bit more of a forehead there, just adding a little bit more. Pinching the sides where the temples are. If you haven't got any of these stylus tools, go and buy some. They're really cheap and they're amazing tools for smoothing inside of holes. I almost exclusively just use styluses, rakes and loop tools. And occasionally I've got a set of dentist tools which are quite useful as well, but I find the more tools I have around, the more unnecessary stuff I do. Sometimes when you limit yourself with tools, you get more productivity, I find, at times. Not always. So this technique that I'm doing now, I don't have a name for, but I've seen loads of other people do it. Maybe somebody could tell me what it's called, or maybe there is no name. I'm going to call it balling. I'm balling. So I'm basically creating, or trying my best to create 2 equally sized balls simultaneously, and then lay them down opposite each other, and then try and sculpt them down at the same time. I much prefer to work this way than working on one side of a figure or a face and then having to match it after. I find that's just too much hassle. Need some more weight on the jaw. So I'm going to start balling again. Balling. Or snaking. Sometimes snaking. Not just balling, but snaking. Takes a bit of practice, and I still find for some reason my left always seems to be slightly bigger than my right. I'm talking about my ball size here. Yes, I went there. Sculpting a head would probably take the same time as it would to sculpt a body. And I'm not particularly good at faces, so it's a lot of trial and error, going back over things. I'll at least get the basics down today, and then I'll probably do some more refining over the weekend. It would be nice if I could do the entire thing live, but it does feel different, I must admit. So if we line it up with the reference again, trying to get similar size in mass, ignoring the hair of course. Good old Arnie. Now, slight problem. You see here we've hit the tin foil that was underneath, which means at some point I've put way too much clay on this side, and the armature, the ball inside, is actually more over to this side. Hopefully I can squash the foil in enough and shift everything over so that I won't have to start again. Would be slightly annoying, but I don't mind doing it. It's only a 5-minute head sculpt, 10-minute head sculpt, and it's good practice, obviously. Yeah, I think I might have to do another one, or maybe not. I'm not sure. I mean, worst comes to worst, if I'd gone a bit further, I don't think I've gone far enough for it to be a problem for me to start again, but if I'd spent 4 hours on this and then realised that, then the other option would be to go in with a knife or some scissors and just start carving out the tin foil around there. It's savable, salvageable for sure. Okay, so I'm going to have to sign off very soon, but I hope you're enjoying watching the figure come together. I will try not to touch it too much until I can make another live video. And my phone's about to die anyway. It's getting there. Remember in the last video I said that obviously he's a superhero, so he needs to have a certain presence, but he's not ripped like mega ripped, but he's going to be fairly toned, of course. So that is the look I'm going for. One thing that I didn't mention earlier, when talking about smoothing, I mentioned the lighter, which is really good for blending some of the finer marks down to a flat surface, using a jet flame so you don't get any soot or residue on the clay from the fire, from the flame. But if you combine that with mineral spirits, now please be careful when you're doing this, because obviously the mineral spirits are flammable, but if you work not an excessive amount into a flat surface like this, you'll see that it's still shiny. I think you can still see that. When it starts to lose its shine, you'll notice that like a molten clay builds up around the brush, which is really nice just to fill in the cracks with your finger. It's like smoothing over polyfiller or whatever it's called, for filling in holes in walls. But after you've done that, because of the mineral spirits being flammable, if you then go over it with the lighter, obviously if it's too wet it will catch on fire, but it normally goes out pretty quick. But because of that, it seems to melt the monster clay really, really, really nicely. And often when I'm finishing a sculpt, the final layer, I will go over it with the mineral spirits and then run over it, especially on the hard surfaces like any metal or armour kind of thing. It's a much better way of getting it smooth. You can see that patch in the middle now, it's almost completely level. If you repeat that process a few times, obviously it would be like glass, super smooth. You do have to be a bit careful with this technique. You can't overdo it and you lose all the definition that you've just put in. But if you're quite restrained and you know when to use it and when not to, you can get a really nice, quick way of just smoothing down the rough shapes. And then later on in the detail as well. It's really nice if you want to say, let's say you want to cut a really intricate shape. If you warm the clay up a lot, you can then go in with a tool, obviously, and it would allow you to cut shapes in much easier because the clay's melted, and then you can soften it back down. It's a nice way of doing like burnt skin or some textured fabrics. It works quite well with. Now he has a hole in his back, but that's fine. It's also nice if you want to join two parts of a sculpt together that you've made separately. I would advise, if they're not on the same armature, I would advise using a pin technique, where you would say, for when I want to attach the head, I would get a little piece of wire. I'm not going to have any wire nearby, am I? Of course not. No wire. But yeah, I would make sure there's a piece of wire coming out of here and another piece of wire coming out of where I'm joining it to, and then you would slip the two together. And on the clay that's going to be in contact, you can run the lighter over it and then squish it together so it gets a really good join. It's not necessary all the time, and if you're making your figure in separate parts, then chances are you want to keep them separate for moulding. But it's just another technique if you want to join things together. I'm really sorry about the comments in this video, not replying. I did a much better job last time actually, because I had my laptop in a different place. I will do that next time. I'm going to try and get a setup where I can see the comments as they come in. It's not that I don't appreciate it, people that are watching, thank you very much for watching. We'll answer the comments after. Can be a bit distracting, but I'm sure I can get used to it. I'm going to sign off. Thank you once again very much for watching. I'll probably try and go live again on Monday night for me, which is GMT +1 time. So you can work that out, what it would be, early evening, maybe later evening for you, if you want to tune in and see the rest of this. By then I'm going to hopefully have a little bit more done to it, so I can show you some more interesting stuff in terms of how I start building clothing, layering clothing, and making, not weapons, because he's not going to have a weapon as such, but I might consider making, as this is it's going to be a special edition for a Kickstarter reward, I might sculpt some relevant accessories to go with the character, which I don't want to give away too many spoilers, or any spoilers actually at this stage, so, but it means I can show you how I go about building accessories and weapons, and how I use other materials like plastics, metals, metal chains, all sorts of other things to bring the character to life. And I might even paint this. Doesn't affect the moulding process as long as it's all dealt with properly beforehand. I'm not sure yet. I might mould it and then paint the cast, or I might paint the monster clay figure to use as promotion for the Kickstarter, and then worry about the moulding after that. I'm not sure which way I'm going to go with that yet. But yeah, let's put our fake Arnie head on for a second. I would like his eyes to be level, more or less, maybe slightly to the side. It's a little bit far forward as well, I think, the head, but for now, you get an approximate idea of where I'm going, where I am with it. Thanks very much for watching. See you next time.